Good morning. It's August 29th, 2017, and this is News from the Roots. I'm Avram Friedman with Mountain Stream TV, and I have with me this morning Tom Baker of the Jackson County Veterans Support Group. And before we get into our conversation, Tom, I'm going to go over the day's schedule.
That'd be fine.
Okay. So, after News from the Roots at 10 o'clock, we're going to have an archived News from the Roots that I recorded last week with Lisa McBride, the manager of the Silva Farmers Market, and we'll talk a little bit about the history of the farmers market and the role it plays in our community. Then at 10:30, we'll have another archived News from the Roots with Bridget Flaherty of Down Home, North Carolina, and we'll talk about the plight of working people in North Carolina, how Down Home is fighting to raise the minimum wage and to give public employees the right for collective bargaining and other issues to do with labor in our state. And then at 11:40 a.m., we'll have an archived News from the Roots, actually the first one we ever recorded, which was a conversation with Selma Sparks. Selma was the only woman journalist who was permitted to interview Malcolm X. This was in the 1960s. Very interesting history. Black journalist in North Carolina, in New York rather, and we'll follow her story that goes to the West Coast and then back to New York and finally to North Carolina. And then at 12:50, we will have a poetry reading by Michael Revere. This was recorded in City Lights Bookstore in 2014. Michael Revere, a local poet, and some very interesting readings and literature there. And there was a crowd listening to him in the reading room at City Lights that night. At 1:40, we'll be viewing a presentation on fracking in North Carolina that was given by Katie Hicks from Clean Water for North Carolina. It was sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Macon County, and that was video recorded in Franklin at I think it was at the Methodist Church in Franklin, or I may have given the wrong church. It was I think maybe the Presbyterian Church in Franklin in 2014. Then at 2:50, we'll be viewing a demonstration that took place in Pritchard Park. It was on National Call-In Day on fracking, and that was pretty interesting and fun. There was some street theater going on, and we'll be talking with different people and interviewing different people during that video recording. Then at 3:05 p.m., we go back to the Duke Energy shareholders meeting that took place in Charlotte in 2014. There were demonstrations outside. There were people who purchased one stock of Duke Energy so that they could participate in the shareholders meeting and talk about fracking and mountaintop removal mining and coal ash and some of the other environmental issues that are concerning the operations of Duke Energy. And that's a pretty timely recording and documentary, because some of you may know that Duke Energy recently announced, I think yesterday, that they were stopping construction on a nuclear power plant, the Lee power plant they were planning on building in South Carolina, after having spent about $500 million toward building that plant and charging its ratepayers for that construction. And this is not the first time that's happened. That practice of charging for construction work in progress on new power plants was banned in North Carolina for about 25 years until the legislature overturned that ban and allowed Duke to proceed with this nuclear plant, as well as several coal and natural gas power plants that, even if they're not completed, will be charged to the public, to their ratepayers, not their shareholders, they're ratepayers. So we're all going to be paying for these big boondoggles that we tried to stop when they started.
Yeah, that's an unusual strategy they've got.
Yeah. And then finally at 3:50 this afternoon, we'll have a presentation on landslides in western North Carolina by Jennifer Bauer. This was sponsored by the Watershed Association of the Tuckasegee River. And again, this could be a timely issue with all the rain that's coming our way. We're hoping it'll bypass us. What's going on in Texas now is a terrible tragedy, but if we get that much rain here, we're going to see landslides. And it's an issue that, as the population increases in western North Carolina, flat land is really a valuable commodity and becoming a more rare commodity in the mountains, and people are building homes and entire developments on steeper and steeper slopes. And that creates a hazardous situation, not only for the people who are living in those homes, but for the people downstream of them, because very often they cut roads and change the landscape, and that causes soil erosion, and that pollutes the rivers as the torrents of rain and water come down.
It's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected, and so this presentation is about that issue. So, Tom, tell us a little bit about the work of the Jackson County Veterans Support Group.
Well, first, let me thank you for allowing me to be here.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you.
It sounds like you've got some very interesting programs for today, and I need to be more aware of those programs. It sounds like it'd be great. In an explanation, 4 or 5 years ago, a couple of vets realized that these young veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan needed help that we didn't receive when we came back from Vietnam. And we put our heads together and came up with the Jackson County Veterans Support Group. And it's an organization that mission is to help these young veterans, male and female, assimilate back into civilian life as best we can. And in doing that, we have several projects that I'd like to tell you about in order to bring these veterans home properly.
Yeah, please do. It's a fairly well-known fact that, veterans get sent off to war, and we spend billions, trillions, in this case, of taxpayer money to send people off to wars that many of us disagree with, that feel like they're really not well-founded wars, looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and searching for terrorists in Afghanistan that actually live in Pakistan, and veterans that are doing multiple tours of duty that they really didn't sign up for when they joined the armed forces, and then they come back and they're treated as if they're waste material of some kind.
Sadly, a lot of our politicians are real quick to rattle their sabers and send Johnny and Susie marching off to war. They're a lot slower to understand that when Johnny and Susie come back from war, they're not the same. And you said an important factor. A lot of these young vets have had multiple tours in combat. There's used to be an old saying during Vietnam that if you pull one combat tour, unless you've seen buku stuff, you generally come back okay. The demons are there, but you pull 2 combat tours, you're going to be messed up. And if you pull 3, which a lot of these guys are pulling 3 and 4 even, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. It's very few of them come back unscathed, and that's part of our mission is to help these vets. And one of the first events that I'd like to talk to you about is an event we have for the last 4 years done on Mountain Heritage Day. It's called a hump, or the non-civilians, that's a march or a hike. And we get as many veterans and friends of veterans, family, to meet there at the fairgrounds at Mountain Heritage Day. That's this year's September the 30th, Saturday. We're going to kick off around 10 o'clock, and we're going to march from Cullowhee into Sylva. We're going to stop in the Catamount Gap, and 3 of us do a little photo op, a rappel off of Catamount Gap with the American flag. And it's a patriotic event. We're a little concerned this year with all the hate marches that are occurring across the countries, that ours would be misconstrued. We love our country. We believe in peace and nonviolence. Most warriors believe that, and what we're trying to do is bring attention to the number of veterans, the number 22, that kill themselves every day, and that it's really a higher number. Only like 34 states will even record a death as a suicide. So one of the states that won't is Texas, and they have a huge veteran population there. So the number is higher than 22.
22 a day?
22 a day. Our group, small as we are, lost a member, a Marine, Vietnam vet. He took his life last fall. We lost another Marine 3 days ago. I'm going to his funeral Wednesday. He wasn't in our group, but he was 27, 28 years old. Killed himself, had a wife and a child. The demons hammer some people where they just can't handle it. And our march, our hump, our hope is to bring recognition to that number, and family members of vets or vets themselves will know they can come to us and get some help, some understanding. So that's our mission on this particular event.
Can you describe to me what these demons are? What are some of the issues that veterans are dealing with?
Well, especially if you're a combat vet, if you've been in situations to where your friends have been killed or maimed, if you've had to take life, you had to kill people in the line of duty. You can, if it's, there's a term in righteous kill. If it's the bad guys coming at you or your group and you take them out, you can kind of live with that. But nowadays, sadly, in Iraq and Afghanistan, you don't know who the bad guys are. Very similar to Vietnam. I've got a couple of demons that come back to see me sometimes, and I've struggled with that for years. It was civilians in what they called a free kill zone back then. You're 19 and you're doing your job, and you take these individuals out, and years later you kind of realize that maybe they didn't know they were in a free kill zone. Were they VC? Probably, but you don't know. They were unarmed.
So you were in Vietnam?
I was in Vietnam, yeah. Got over there with the 101st, and I transferred out to be a door gunner with the 1st Cav, so I was over there in 68.
So you were there for 1 year?
1 year in a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's one of those things to where when we formed this group, we wanted to reach out to the young vets in hopes that when we came back from Vietnam, the country was in a pretty bad state. A lot of, it was in the middle of the civil rights movement. There was a lot of turmoil and whatnot, and we got caught up in the middle of that. We got spit on, not every plane load of vets coming back were met like that, but I was. And you don't ever forget that, when you've lost friends over there. So, it's tough, and those are just part of the demons. Being away from family can work on you. So,
Were you provided with any mental health services or
not back then. A lot of the guys, I still had a year in service. I was stationed at Fort Campbell after I got back from Vietnam, but a lot of the guys, they pulled them out of the bush one day, and 2 days later they're back on the streets of Seattle and Chicago. And
government didn't provide any kind of
yeah,
support network?
yeah, not a pat on your back, not a thank you for your service. Here's your ticket home. And so it was very difficult, and the military is doing a much better job of supporting the family and the vets, but the problem is oftentimes the military have counselors and psychologists that have never been in combat, and they're interviewing these kids that have, as we said, seen the beast. And there is an immediate disconnect. You can tell when you're talking to a counselor or psychologist that's never been there. It's almost like a glaze comes over their face. And then you get into mode that you protect your emotions and you just answer the questions that they're throwing at you. And there's no real help there. It's just a process that in order to get out, you have to go through. Not all of the counselors are that way, but far too many.
So what's the way to resolve that issue? Would it be to have psychologists and counselors who have had war experience?
Well, at least prior military, in our opinion, and there's a lot of argument on that. We think that the counselors and psychologists working for the VA and for the military, for these kids just when they're getting out of the service, need to be veterans, preferably combat veterans. But you don't find many. We've got one person in our vet group that's going to Western, former Marine, and he's trying to major in counseling. And he will be a good asset, but it may be less than 1% are. So we try to encourage the VA to look for those individuals. We try to encourage these young vets to possibly try that major, but all we can do is try.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting aspect. You were concerned when organizing this march from Coahuila to Silva that it might be construed as a hate march of some kind, And I think it's important for people to realize that veterans are not far-right extremists. And that, like, for instance, you're a member of the NAACP. You're in the executive committee of the NAACP. And I think many other veterans also understand the injustices that are going on around us, and racial injustice and economic injustice. And brings to mind a moment I was extremely proud of veterans last year when thousands of veterans went up to Standing Rock and stood in between the police and the protesters, who were men, women, and children sitting in prayer circles, getting hit by rubber bullets and guard dogs and maced, and the veterans went up there and heroically stood in, and that was a turning point.
That was a perfect example of how most veterans feel, that they are the protectors of the rights and people. And the ones that went out there should have been given some sort of medal for their tenacity and So you're exactly right. Sometimes their veterans are misconstrued as being way off. And we're patriots. I love the American flag. Uh, you have to forgive me. Sometimes I get a little emotional, but I love the American flag and I respect it, and we strive to have it with us when we do the hump. But those individuals that went out to Standing Rock were heroes. They stood up against the worst of corporate greed. There's nothing wrong with corporations and profits, but when they try to go to the extreme that those folks did, and then they're backed by certain people in Congress, then you got to draw the line, and veterans have no problem generally stepping into that line.
And I could tell you that was not a frivolous action on the part of those veterans and everybody who went up to Standing Rock. I was there the week before I went up there, and it was harsh conditions up there. It was 17 degrees. This was in November in North Dakota, and the wind was blowing at 40 miles an hour. And it was all you could do to just withstand the weather conditions, and to camp out. It took me about 4 hours to set up a tent in those conditions, and I can tell you that was a difficult thing for all those veterans to do. They didn't have to do it, but their hearts were so powerful and strong that they did it, and they saved a lot of people.
I wish the nation as a whole, through the media, would have been more aware of exactly what did take place there.
Yeah.
Sadly, sometimes it is misconstrued. I applaud you guys and gals for being there. There was actually some talk in our group of going out there, but sometimes you overvalue work and so on and so forth. So it was a difficult choice, but the ones that did go, I applaud them.
Well, and what they did, it was so heroic, but it was also impactful. It was so effective because when the veterans went up there, the news media followed them. And so a lot of the things that were going on there were exposed because of the actions of the veterans, and they brought safety and peace to that entire situation where there was none before. It was like predators after their prey before that, and
I think you'll see that more in the future too. Sadly, I think it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be a lot more hate marches, and the hate groups have been emboldened, and in order to stand up against them, it's going to take courage and tenacity, and I think the vets will be right there with folks like yourself and other groups, and it's just going to be necessary, I think.
And I wonder, and maybe I'm stepping out of line here, but if that, in a sense, is a type of therapy for some of the veterans to be able to play a role like that, because, as you mentioned, that they come home from war and suddenly they're in this vacuum of feeling like they're not appreciated at all. They're useless in the role they've been trained to play.
I think that's a big part of it. We discussed that quite a bit in our group meetings. Why are we gathering? It's a whole combination of things. Most people miss that camaraderie, that bond that you find in the military, that you struggle to find just out in the workplace. And so you gravitate towards certain things that bring that back to you. The other thing is we have been trained to step forward. And when we see, to coin a phrase, misjustice or something that we don't like, then we generally do not hesitate to step forward, be it a march to bring attention to the number of young vets killing themselves, or the injustice at Standing Rock, or I don't know how many vets were at Charlottesville, but I got a feeling that if something like that were to occur again in the future, you'll see more vets there, if nothing else, as a safeguard between the two groups. Law enforcement steps in oftentimes, maybe a little hesitantly. And I think vets would be a good asset in those situations.
I mean, so again, like, I believe the figure is about $3 trillion that the United States has spent on maintaining a presence in Iraq and Afghanistan to date. And then veterans come home and lawmakers say, well, we just don't have the money in the budget to provide better services for veterans. I mean, I can't imagine how anybody could justify that position in their minds as a lawmaker. But if you were a legislator, what are some of the measures that should be taken to make sure that veterans are taken care of?
Well, there's a lot of discussion out there on what to do with the VA. We're blessed to have one of the best, if not the best, veterans hospitals in the country over here in Asheville. But yet, even saying that, there are some problems, especially in certain areas like orthopedics. But they've done well over there. The VA needs to be held accountable for the hospitals and clinics that aren't up to snuff. Sometimes they disregard these veterans' problems, a lot of them being psychological. For whatever reason, PTSD is a relatively new word, but I promise you it's been around since cavemen threw rocks at each other. There's too much documentation from
post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
Yeah.
We like to call it post-traumatic stress. If you start labeling people with disorders, then you isolate them, and they feel like they're more sick than they are. So it's a touchy subject, and we deal with it all the time. We have some vets in our group that have disability because of PTSD. I think all combat vets struggle with it to some degree, some more than others. It's one of those costs of when Johnny and Susie come home from war that the American public doesn't want to hear about. The patent attitude of suck it up and drive on and don't cry to me, and that doesn't work. They the old World War II vets, and a lot of people will order at me for this. They were tough individuals, and they handled that well, but they struggled too when they come back. They just didn't talk about it. Society was more closed then. And
do you think it made a difference that perhaps the war that they were fighting, it was so apparent that that war had to be fought?
Oh yeah, it did, and it's a bad term, but it's referred to as the good war. There was a cause. They were saving the world, and they did, and they did amazing things. But Vietnam, even Korea, and Vietnam, and Iraq, and Afghanistan, you talk to the GIs, you go over there. When I went to Nam, I was kind of gung-ho. I was an Army brat, and I thought I was saving the world from communism, and it didn't take me long to realize that those people had been fighting for years. All they wanted to be was left alone, you know, Dick Cheney, and I don't want to start getting into politics, but Dick Cheney and that Halliburton bunch, Iraq was a moneymaker for them, and they made billions and billions of dollars. Afghanistan started out with the right approach with special operations and working with tribal elders over there, and then it blew into something totally different. So a lot of good men and women have died, and I don't know exactly what we've gained from any of that.
I remember, I grew up in that area as well, and I remember Henry Kissinger and his domino effect. That was going to, you know, if we didn't fight the war in Vietnam, communism was going to take over the world, and, well, we lost Vietnam, and communism didn't take over the world, and that's a terrible tragedy. I hope a lesson that American people will learn about.
We don't learn very well, not to get into history, but Ho Chi Minh went to Potsdam to talk to Truman about trying to make Vietnam independent, and we sided with de Gaulle, who was a colonialist, and Ho Chi Minh turned around, and there Stalin was, say, "I'll help you, big boy," and there it went.
Yeah.
A lot of people died on both sides. So had we just used a little bit more common sense, and could have been different, but
Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction.
Same thing.
Again, yeah.
I actually even protested against that war, which was a big step for me. You know, I'm a proud American, and it was not easy for me to get up there, but that was
It's
pretty much a worth, especially the way they went about it. It was worthless.
It seems to happen over and over again, where the news media, everybody just feeds into this fever of going to war without really examining the reasons, and they seem to forget that people are, tens, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. You know, put their lives on the line for something, and it's not something you do unless your country is being threatened.
Like the Second World War.
Like the Second World War, where the world is actually being threatened, and there's no alternative. You know, that's my view. You know, that, you know, I'm not a pacifist in general. I mean, I like to be as much of a pacifist as possible, but I recognize sometimes you need to fight, you know, to defend yourself. But if it's for any other reason, I think it's just it's foolish and it's wasteful. It's a tragedy.
Well, I think it's taken advantage of young men and women who are patriotic and want to do their job and are somewhat zealous about. And these people take advantage of that, you know, for many reasons. Eisenhower talked about the cautions needed to be done around the industrial war machine. Those people are just about profit, and they don't care who they maim to get that, and they can circumvent a lot of activities and present it in a way that people want to go forth when they shouldn't be going forth. Our group is trying to help the young veterans who have went forth and are struggling. We laugh a little bit, we talk a little bit, we cry sometimes. We're all about taking care of each other, and you know, the Hump Mountain Heritage Day is an attempt to take care of those vets, the young vets, well, all vets. The one we lost out of our group was a Vietnam vet. He was 71 and had just fought the demons until he couldn't fight them anymore. The young vet whose funeral I'm going to Wednesday was, I think, 26, 27. He couldn't find his demons anymore. So it's our job our mission to reach out and try to help to prevent that, take that 22 to 0.
So important for the public to differentiate between people who get us into wars and the people who fight the wars. I mean, people who fight the wars don't have a choice. They're heroes. They're the ones who are putting their lives on the line, and they're told they're putting their lives on the line for their country. And we all owe a great debt of gratitude to those people. And I think you'll find that the people who are protesting against wars understand that for the most part.
Most of them do. I
yeah.
believe that. I know one of our fears, and we talked about it just a minute ago, was with all the protests going on with the alt-right and the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan, that we're really hoping that our effort is not misconstrued. We will be led by the American flag, and we will be in packs and some beat-up old military shirts. Anyway, it was originally started as what they call a silky hike. The Marines do a lot of their PT now in shorts, and so we emulate that a little bit. Most of us are going to be in shorts with the packs and the flags, and it's a patriotic thing, but it's to draw attention to there's going to be vets in that group that have came very close to committing suicide themselves. And I think without our group, they might have took that step into Valhalla. We'll never know. But
and these are not homeless people. These
no, these are working, going to school, family people. It's just it's hard to fight the demons by yourself.
Are there homeless vets in Jackson County?
Well, that's another mission that we have. There are a few. I think the number is growing a little bit. I've got 5 calls in the last month from veterans needing help. 2 of them were homeless. One of them is what they call a walker. He's had drug problems, and so they keep moving. And he's got a dog, and you've probably seen him around Silva, tall, slim guy with a beard. You know, there are no homeless shelters in Jackson County right now. There are a few organizations that Eddie Wells was telling me about, that where they put them up temporarily in motel rooms, especially in the wintertime. But as far as a veterans homeless area, there isn't one, and we're working with J.D. Arch and Richard Sneed, the new chief, to try to coordinate with the tribe and see if we can come up with some funds or a house or something to create an entity for homeless
in Cherokee?
vets. Cherokee, yeah. Yeah. They're pretty progressive down there as far as helping vets, and you know, so a lot of those guys are friends of mine. We just got a call a couple of days ago by some of the Cherokee vets that were interested in starting a group like ours. These smaller groups tend to be more proactive. I love the American Legion. I am a member of the VFW, but if they're struggling to get young vets in for many reasons, and ours is just an alternative to that. We try to be active, and these young vets need that. And I think the American Legion and VFW will learn that, and their numbers will increase. They do a lot of good things nationally, but locally, little groups like ours are pretty effective. And these young vets are not great joiners like the ones after the Second World War. You know, where the Elks and the Moose Lodge and all of that really grew. Since Vietnam, young vets getting out are not as active joiners as some of the others. So they're struggling. All the groups are struggling to get more members.
So, how many people are in the group in Jackson County?
We have about 15 fairly active. There's 40 total. Everybody has a little bit more time than others, but we have about 14 or 15 that are fairly active, and that's a good core. The chief, Richard Sneed, is a former Marine, or once a Marine, always a Marine, and so is his wife, and we just had a gathering at his house this past Saturday, and so that makes a good connection between our group and the veterans at Cherokee, and we'll get things done. We've got another program. If you've got a minute, I'll tell you about it.
Yes, please.
All right. The week before Veterans Day, for the last 5 years, our Jackson County Veterans Support Group has put on a program at the university called Unseen Scars. And it's a roundtable discussion by anywhere from 6 to 8 veterans about their experiences in the military. Most of them are combat vets, but not all of them. And they can go as deep as they want to or as shallow as they want to, talking about combat experiences and their experiences when they come back, assimilating back into their families and then assimilating back into jobs or schools. The students at Western have been very supportive. The English department's been great. The counseling and psychology department have been lagging, in my opinion, and I don't want them quarreling at me, but those are the ones that I think need to be there to hear these stories. We've had students come down that brought their parents with tears in their eyes, and they said, we finally understand why Dad acts the way he does, or why my sister, when she came back, acts this way, or why my cousin. So they're stories that these students have never really heard up close and personal. So it creates a niche there, and we've done that, like I say, for the last, this will be the 5th year. And it is well received. I'd love to see it grow more. All wounds are not visible. These guys and gals that come back that have been blown up and shot up, it's terrible to see what they've gone through. And they need all the love and support we can get, but there's also other wounds that you can't see that need to be attended to. So those are the 2 big events that we do. Other than just regular gatherings, we go to the shooting range. We all love to shoot, and Jackson County's blessed with a good shooting range out on the head of Cullowhee Mountain, and so we keep them active, and that's good.
Are there, I'm sure there are, but are you in touch with support groups like yours in other parts of the country or surrounding counties?
Probably not as much as we should be, and they are out there. We'll get flyers or something across Facebook. Murphy has a fairly similar vet group, and they're fairly active. Haywood County has a few motorcycle clubs that tend to be primarily veterans, and there's another misconstrued image. A lot of people see a motorcycle group go by,
Hells Angels.
and that's the first thing they think of. Where most of those old guys are and gals are veterans, and they're not all like what happened in Texas, where they have the shootout. Ironically, a good friend of mine is president of a motorcycle group, and they're working to bring those motorcycle groups that had all the problems in Texas together and focus on being more beneficial to society than maybe some of them have been in the past. So it's easy to misconstrue. I'll give you an example. if we're not going over time,
We're fine.
Saturday at the vigil, Saturday night,
Mm-hmm.
there was a young man there that had the wife beater T-shirt on and the shaved head, and he was in the back of the crowd, and he and his family had went up to where the monument is, which is a whole nother issue. And the cops had talked to him, and I kept an eye on him. I was afraid maybe he was going to be an antagonist.
He came down and held a candle.
He came down and held the candle.
Yeah.
He had a son by a previous marriage with a black lady, and he was just showing support. But it's that image thing that you can misconstrue.
Can't tell a book by its cover.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that's even more important in today's efforts to bring peace and stability around and nonviolence and stop hate, is to take a breath and look and think a little bit before we react. So
And learn a little bit more about the people that we're judging before we judge them.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like that lady that gave us the thumb down in the candle
She
vigil.
didn't know anything about what we were doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very true. So well, that's interesting. You mentioned about the motorcycles. I'm wondering. Every year they have this gathering of motorcycle riders in Cherokee at the fairgrounds, at the tribal grounds. And I'm wondering. That's probably true that many of those people are veterans as well. I mean, there's all kinds of people. There's a diverse group of people that ride motorcycles. It's not just Hell's Angels. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Ironically, toys are expensive.
Yeah.
And, so you got to be reasonably funded to even buy some of them. But I think a lot of vets have for years, but even more so now. It's part of that coming together, that camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
And they can't find it in any other group, so they create, and they like to ride, and they create this group. And anytime you have big groups, you're going to have a bad egg or two, and it's up to you to weed them out. And that's what Will Delaney's trying to do with those motorcycle groups that were in Texas, and he's a big, strong special operator, and if anybody can do it, he can do it. But it's necessary. But most of them are just people that want to ride together and maybe drink a beer together and have camaraderie.
In terms of veteran support groups, is there any kind of a national organization or a national gathering that happens?
Well, the bigger groups like the VFW and American Legion, they have national groups, and they do a lot of lobbying with legislators to help with veterans affairs, but they're just struggling more on the local level, I think, trying to get younger veterans. It almost breaks your heart to see some of these funerals for veterans where the honor guard is so old that they can't do the proper presentation, and they're gutsy individuals, and they're patriots, and they do the best they can, but they need an influx of young people in to help in those situations.
The American Legion, I know at one time kind of had a reputation as extreme right wing, and especially during and after the Vietnam War period. My understanding or my perception is that they've changed.
It's been my perception too. Now nationally, they may still be a little bit more loud to the right than a lot of the local members, but Roy Burnett is the past president of the group here in Silva, and they're great guys. They put on that Memorial Day event there at the courthouse steps, and they actually have a women's auxiliary that very supportive of our group. They have walked with us before, and they supply us with financial contributions and cookies and cakes, which is hard to put a price on. So they're good for the community.
So, what can people do who are not veterans but understand or I hesitate to use the word understand, but who understand some of the issues anyway that are confronting veterans and would like to help and support? What should people do?
Well, there again, talk to veterans. We're not unapproachable. If you've got a friend or a family member that's a veteran, say, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit, and sit down. If they want to help with the different groups, I'm sure the American Legion and the VFW would love to have support our group. If there's anybody out there that wants to be part of our group or help, they can call me. Do you mind if I give them my phone number?
No, please.
Okay, my cell phone is area code 828-508-5522, and they can call me anytime, and I'd be glad to sit down with them. We've actually met several vets at Bojangles. I'll do a little stab for them. That are not ready to join the group per se, but want to just talk to another vet. And we've met with several. A couple of them have got drug issues. A couple of them have got psychological issues. But they need somebody to talk to. And I will say that the Jackson County Veterans do a terrible name. Sheila Setzer and David Plaster are the county VA representatives. They get people hooked up with whatever needs they have through the VA. And I should be doing a better job of describing their exact title, but they work out there at the Center for the old people behind the DSS building for the elderly.
You don't mean the social services building, but the Department on Aging.
Department on Aging.
Yes.
Yeah. And they have their office there, and it's David Plaster and Sheila Setzer, and they are extremely helpful to vets that are, having problems. They'll connect them with VA hospital. They will connect them with legal services. They do a great job. So there's a lot of avenues of help for vets. It's getting the vet to take that first step, and it's not easy. Getting them to realize maybe that it's okay not to be okay, and that there's lots of us out there just like they are that are struggling a little bit occasionally, and so it's a never-ending battle. There are a lot of veterans out there. This war in Afghanistan has been going on for 13 years. My nephew just got out of the Navy, 20 years, and he spent 4 tours. He spent 2 in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan. And he's got PTS issues, great kid, got blew up twice, got some physical problems, didn't lose any limbs, but he's just struggling. And so there's thousands of kids like that. So we need to reach out and help them, and that's what the Jackson County Veteran Support Group is trying to do.
Is there a web page or a Facebook page?
There is it's right now it's kind of a closed Facebook page. We tried creating one that was more open, but we were getting a lot of crazies, and so it's a closed issue. I'm not a technical guru, but if they call me, I can get them in touch with a couple of the guys that sort of handle the technical end of that. And if they're serious and pass muster, we would let them be on the Facebook with us. So it's one of those sad things we have to be careful.
Is there anything else that you would like us to know about?
Well, I just want to reiterate that we will be doing the Hump Mountain Heritage Day, and it is for a good cause.
What's that date?
September the 30th. And we'll be kicking off from the fairgrounds there at Camp Lab at 10 o'clock in the morning. And we're going to be marching into Silva. And we're going to be stopping at Catamount Gap for that photo op. We're going to be stopping at O'Malley's to have a brew for our fallen friends. And we're going to wind up at the Sneaky Squirrel. John Duncan is a major in the National Guard, very veterans friendly. Great place down there, good food, and we're going to wind up there. So anybody that wants to participate or be there at the end of the trail can be there. We just want folks to realize that it's a good cause that we're representing, and not misconstrue a bunch of hardcore looking individuals doing the hike. And
others are welcome to join you in the hike?
We've opened it up to anybody that's capable of walking that 7 miles, and the more the merrier. And it's to have fun for a serious cause, to prevent these young veterans from killing themselves. And so we make it sort of a fun event. But it is serious, and that's our goal, to take 22 to 0.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us, and
Well,
maybe you'll
thank
come
you.
back and give us an update sometime.
I would like to do that, and thank you for having me. And what you're doing, I think, it is amazing, and I'm going to try to hook into that. I'm not very savvy on this stuff, but the work of the NAACP and the Canary Coalition and all the groups becomes more important every day.
Just tune into mountainstream.tv and you'll be able to view this, go up into the archives, and we'll be putting it there in the next day or two.
I will try to look in on that and have some of my vets look in on it, and maybe we can all work together to make this a better world to live in.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.